In the years since I finished school, I feel like I've seen a noticeable decline in my cognitive abilities, and this is a video about how I'm fighting back, and how you can too. But before I give those tips on how to unrot your brain, I think we need to do a little lesson on how the cognitive functions work, because when someone tells me that something is going to be beneficial, I like to dig a little deeper into exactly what it's doing to help. By the way, my name is Jillian. Welcome to my channel, Jillian by Design, where I am dedicated to living life by design and not by default, and documenting the process. My credentials are that I like to engage in research as a hobby to aid in my own self-improvement, and I learned some pretty helpful things along the way, so I thought, why not share? In order for us to be conscious functioning humans, our brains are doing a lot of things simultaneously, and today I want to talk about the 6 core cognitive processes. These are the basic functions that help our brain take in information and make sense of the world that we interact with around us. I'm going to read from my notes to make sure that the true definitions don't get lost in my ability to paraphrase, so forgive me for having my laptop. The 6 core cognitive processes. The first is perception, which is the process of organizing and interpreting sensory information. It is essentially how our brains collect data by using our 5 senses: touch, taste, sight, smell, and sound. Second is attention, which is the ability to focus on specific stimuli and be mentally aware in an environment. Third is memory, which is the process of storing and being able to retrieve specific information in the short and long term. Fourth is learning, which is the process of acquiring new knowledge through experience, study, or being taught. Fifth is language, which is how we communicate by taking abstract symbols, written and verbal, and applying meaning to convey a message. And sixth is thought and reason, which is how we utilize stored knowledge to form opinions, make decisions, and solve problems. All of these processes are important, but most important of them is what is called executive functioning. The primary executive functions are working or short-term memory, inhibition control, which is the ability to resist impulses and block out distractions, and cognitive flexibility, which is the ability to adapt to unexpected changes and reconfigure your thoughts, such as when you need to transition between different tasks. I started learning about the executive functions because I was learning to cope with my executive dysfunction as someone who has ADHD. And while executive dysfunction is a symptom associated with various medical conditions such as ADHD, anxiety, or depression, someone can experience the symptoms of executive dysfunction without having any of those medical conditions, in the same way that someone can be anxious without having an anxiety disorder. And I bring all this up because several of the symptoms associated with executive dysfunction, such as brain fog, inattentiveness, lack of motivation, disorganization, are also increasingly being associated with consumption of brain rot and being chronically online. The removal of the chronological feed and the introduction of the infinite scroll UI was very intentionally designed to be as addictive as it is when it comes to social media. But the reason that so many of us turn to doom scrolling as a way to self-soothe is more complex than that, in my opinion, which means that the solution also needs to be tackled from multiple angles. And breaking the doom scrolling addiction is simply not enough. So let's talk about the 5 ways to unrot your brain and get those executive functions back functioning the way they're supposed to. Number 1 is starting a digital garden. A digital garden is a place for you to store your thoughts and opinions about the things that are interesting to you. It's kind of like a personal blog without the pressure to be curated for anyone else's entertainment, because it's more of just an archive of things that you care to learn more about. I discovered the concept of a digital garden from the YouTube creator Anna Howard, and I started mine using her Notion template. I will link it in the description of this video and link her video as well. One of the side effects of my brain turning to mush is that I noticed I was losing my ability to retain information. I consume a lot of media in all forms: books, articles, social media posts, films, etc. And there's always bits and pieces of that media that stick out to me, but without taking any notes on it, it's simply going in one ear and out the other, because with such unlimited access to information, my brain is overwhelmed. And I think a digital garden is so cool because it gives you a space to keep up with all those different thoughts so that you can explore them later in your free time as something to do instead of doom scrolling. And it also gives you a way to see how the different things that you're interested and attracted to connect. And at least in my experience so far, there are some reflections to be gained from that. My garden is still very new, but this video is based on one of the first topics that I decided to explore. So let me know if you're into this kind of thing, because we can get into some more of the flowers in my garden. Is that a cute way to refer to it? I feel like it is. And having a digital garden will help with that working and short-term memory, because you'll get out of the habit of just consuming things and just moving on without making any meaning of it, and get into the habit of taking an idea and then immediately putting it into your own words, which will help it stick so that you can recall that information later. That was one of those things that you had to do in school, and so you never had to think about intentionally getting into the practice. But as an adult, especially if you have a job that is not mentally stimulating, you might not spend a lot of time doing this kind of activity. So try it out. Tip number 2 is to have hobbies. There's this thing called neuroplasticity, which refers to the brain's ability to change and functionally grow in response to learning new things and having new experiences. And while the brain is not a muscle, it works like one in the way that you need to use it or lose it. And a great way to use your brain is by investing in a new hobby. Preferably one that is mentally and physically stimulating, because that kind of multitasking is a great way to challenge your brain. And it's also important that it's a hobby that you can do repeatedly and that increases in its difficulty, so that it's a constant challenge, because that's how you really build that cognitive flexibility and the ability to change and adapt and grow in different and new environments. An example of this is like weightlifting, because it is a physical hobby that's great for your health, but like learning how to correct your form and establish that mind-muscle connection, those kinds of things are also mentally stimulating. Also, you're always increasing your weight, that progressive overload. It's always a new and different challenge. Or if you don't want your hobby to be physical activity, something else could be like pottery. You have to learn how to, actively maneuver a pottery wheel. Think about the creativity of what kind of designs you want to build. Learn different techniques for glazing, building a vase versus a bowl versus a plate. Get creative, whatever your bag is. One of the reasons that social media is so addicting is because it gives you a lot of mildly satisfying dopamine releases, and you want to keep scrolling because you're waiting for that next good hit, and it becomes a vicious cycle. And a great way to replace that habit is by getting your dopamine releases from a quality habit, such as having a new hobby, where it takes a little longer to reach the reward, but ultimately having a new milestone like a new personal record or building something with your own hands is ultimately a much greater reward than seeing a video that you're going to forget by the time you scroll 5 times more. Tip number 3 is that you need to allow yourself to be bored. Unfortunately, there is no way around the need to reduce your screen time if you want to unrot your brain. Life in general is overstimulating, and your mind and your nervous system need more breaks than you're probably allowing it to have. I did a full media deprivation week a couple months ago as part of doing the Artist Way program, and that means no socials, no TV, minimal reading, and a lot of sitting with your own thoughts. And at times it felt like torture, but it was eye-opening in terms of giving me a new kind of mental clarity. And while I'm not saying that everyone needs to do a full media deprivation week, microdosing by starting with no screens in the first hour of the day, the last hour before you go to bed, also giving yourself a bedtime is a good way to start. And this one really helps with that inhibition control, because you might think that you don't have an attachment to your phone until you make yourself take a break, and take one for longer than you actually would like to. Tip number 4 is to start journaling. While you're taking a break from the screens, journaling is a great thing to do instead. I've been a casual journaler for a few years, but recently I have become an almost everyday journaler, especially after doing the Artist Way in the morning pages. And I have to be honest, the practice has changed my life. Journaling in the morning is like wiping the crust out of your eyes. You got to get the crusty thoughts out of your brain to make room for a clear, fresh head to take on the day. Stress is another major contributor to those executive functions not functioning properly. And one of my favorite ways to de-stress is by journaling. Sometimes cognitive impairment is because there's not enough activity going on in that brain, but sometimes it's because there's too much, and there's nothing better than just putting it all on the page. Actually, there is one thing better than putting the stress on the page, and it is coming up with your best ideas on the page, because journaling is also one of my new favorite creative practices. Because sometimes you need to think out loud, and it can be helpful to go back and forth with a friend who understands your ideas, but sometimes no one will understand your ideas like you. And so you just need to go back and forth with yourself in a journal. There's so many different ways to journal, and journaling can truly be anything that you want or need it to be. And I'll be honest, I didn't bother to research any statistics on journaling actually having health benefits, but trust me, bro, I just know it does. And that concludes today's lesson in living life by design. If we're going to build our dream lives, we have to start with a strong foundation and a sharp mind. So try out these tips. Hopefully you found them helpful. Like the video if you like the video, leave a comment telling me what you learned, and subscribe for more because there's definitely more to come. Bye.